Hey, it's Coach Tim again, and I'm bringing back the Sunday sermon. And today, I wanted to just tell you that good football coaches, are actually better business people than most business people. In fact, Jim Mora, when he was at UCLA a few years back, told me that he does more planning on a Sunday than most people do in their entire careers. Um, why he's reached the level of stature, I suppose, that he has. So I'm going to start there, and I'm going to talk briefly about practice planning meticulously. I called a buddy of mine, a mentor, also somebody who has been on the podcast, Coach Mo, Scott Morrison. And one of the things that he talked about as kind of a throwaway statement was how short his periods are in a football practice. Now, if you know anything about football, or maybe you don't, a football practice isn't just that everybody just show up and then start hitting each other, right? And some gargantuan, monstrous, battle of the wills. No, it's very organized, and a lot of times, minimally, it's broken down into time slots. Typically warm ups, typically followed by what most people call everyday drills, EDDs, which breaks, and then often there's some special teams, and there's a defensive and an offensive period that may even have that broken down. Well, Scott breaks it down into 30 and 40 minute four, I'm sorry, 30 and 40 4-minute periods, which blows me away. Now, what he told me was, he goes, look, I'm talking about football practice, not warm-ups, anything else. And it could take 2 hours, it could take 3 hours to get those periods done, depending on how efficient they are throughout the practice. So each period is a method of achieving a piece in a larger puzzle, if that makes sense. And each period is planned and has many coaches, probably 4 or 5 or 6 coaches or more, all doing their own event within that period. So that's a lot of planning. So I was interested in that, and that's where we'll start. Okay. So how do you get to all that planning? You see, there's a couple measurements of a coach. I'm looking at notes. I don't have ADD, and I'm flicking all over the place here. So Coach Scotty Moe, he told me about a mentor of his and a thought leader that's in the coaching community that I sadly have failed to study. So thankfully, Scotty has shared this with me, and I'm sharing it with you. Joe Ehrman teaches that there are two types of coaches: transactional and transformational. The former measures their success in wins and losses. It's just easier. Go get a bunch of great players. And we're seeing that in Southern California all over the place, where literally last year, a guy did a article in the LA Times, and in Southern California there were thousands of transfers from one school to the next. Absolutely no loyalty whatsoever to that old Beach Boy song. Be true to your school, blah, blah, blah. Well, be true to your school for that season until somebody has a better deal. What I like to say is live by the sword, die by the sword. How many Catholic schools actually have Catholic football players anymore? I don't think too many if you did a poll. And in fact, one Catholic school just got a bunch of their stars this past spring taken from another Catholic school. Again, and I've heard all the excuses, and we're helping kids, and they wouldn't get scholarships otherwise, or blah 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 blah. And then there's another school, a public school, not too far from here, where they're cooking grades, and they win a lot of championships and do very well in the state, like the other two that I was talking about. They're looked to as schools to look up to, and they're cooking grades. And a friend of mine whose kid went there to this particular public school, he said, just watch them. A lot of the kids get scholarships, and then they get to college and they wash out and they end up in junior college to get their grades straight because they really didn't learn anything while they're in high school. So this is transactional coaching. You're not coaching a player for life. You're coaching a player for your win. It is about me, 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 and it's why sometimes you'll hear me talk about the culture of me. And it's endemic. It's throughout our society, and it's infected football. And as far as I am concerned, I don't want that football. I don't want anything to do with it. And if it all went away, I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't shed a tear, because it's not what football's about. Great Amos Alonzo Stagg asked years ago, he's the winningest football coach in the United States at the time. This is talking about 30s, 40s, 50s. He was in Chicago and then made his way over to my school, University of the Pacific, where he retired. The stadium was named after him, and a high school. And he was asked, Coach, what do you think about your kids' great success? And he says, I won't know for another 20 years. He was the first coach to actually attribute or marry the self-actualization of a person to sport. And he was a huge inspiration to John Wooden, who is known basically for that, and pretty much every coach comes up with some sort of philosophy based on Wooden's philosophy and the pyramid. In fact, businesses study the pyramid, and it's essentially philosophy, which essentially is culture, which is another word. If knowing what I know and how the things work, culture in sports is really is about values, and that value system is started from the coach and his philosophy, and it emanates or passes through into the other coaches and into the team, and then we call that a culture. That's what Joe Ehrmann would call a transformational coach, somebody who is self-aware, aware of himself. His ego is getting in the way because he doesn't like that he lost. He's more concerned about a parent getting on him. He's worried about his ego. Been there, done that, and probably still do that. However, we need to, as coaches, as a society, develop values that are not transactional. Let me give you kind of a transactional value, and this has nothing to do with football. This is something, in fact, that a friend of mine, Kenrick Cleveland, has been working on, and in his own words, he separates it by calling it intrinsic and extrinsic values or outcomes. And when we're worried about, our goal, we're taught by self-helpers, we gotta have goals, and then really better goals are SMART goals, right? And anybody who's been in sales has been through that seminar 1,000 times, and I gotta get me a Mercedes, right? Gotta get a Mercedes. Work real hard, and damn it, didn't get my Mercedes. So you feel bad. Or you get the Mercedes, and it's real cool. It's like a little wind funnel that happens when the door closes, as opposed to the other doors that go smack. But the Mercedes closes nice and air. It's like, oh, that's neat. And then, you pay for gas a couple times, and you got to take it in to the mechanic every other day, and you kind of burn out on that Mercedes thing. Now what? So it's Intrinsic is the process, and this is what Scotty told me that Ehrman talks about in a transformational coach. A transformational coach is somebody who is more concerned about the process, in installing that purpose, that mission, those values, that culture into the process. It is a process. It doesn't just happen. This is why, and in fact, to give you an example of the public school I was just mentioning, the father told me, he goes, Tim, a bunch of morons could coach that team and still win a lot of football games. And so it's not that impressive to take a bunch of great talent that have desire and go out and win football games. Just not. What's impressive is culture, is effort. If everybody on the team is striving for that same goal. So Scott told me about a game last year. They won, I think, 30 or 40 to nothing, right? And he says, I wasn't proud. Was not proud of my team at all. That we didn't play with much effort, with much will. I was, ashamed of. He didn't say it this way. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but not happy with his culture, the way that it demonstrated. Whereas he played a game against another team, and they were in it till the fourth quarter, ended up losing by 14 points. One of the running backs just took the game over in the fourth quarter. He's actually going to probably be starting next year at Oregon. And he was proud. He said it was one of the most beautiful things he's ever witnessed, and he lost. And yeah, it hurt. He says that's the problem. He goes, it's hard to be transformational because everything in a game ends in emotion. Everything ends in emotion. It hurts to lose. It feels good to win, right? And so that makes it difficult, and it messes with our heads. So it's much harder to be a transformational coach than a transactional coach. Transactional is easy. You just go find the players. In today's world, that's real simple. You get with the right school that'll cook the books and look the other way when you bring in a kid from 20 miles away, and there you go. You're good job, coach. You did a hell of a job. Now the transformational coach is going to make sure that kid does well in school. He's going to make sure he's doing well at home. He's respectful to his parents, his family, and other citizens. And he's respectful to the fellow students. That's how you coach transformationally. What the hell does that have to do with football? We're making better men. We're making boys to men. Okay? The wins will take care of themselves. Or they won't. Like in Scotty's 14-point loss. But they efforted. They played. Their culture was demonstrated. It was their family that expressed itself out on that football field. And that's what's the beautiful thing about football. A word that reminds me of this culture thing is, because I like to say is, if I have a superior culture, and Scotty stops me when I say superior culture, he doesn't like to say that, but I do, because some cultures are more superior than others. It just is, okay? Or maybe it's lack of culture is a better word. But a superior culture will beat a better talented team until it meets a team that also has superior culture. So the cultures are even now, but the talent's not. Probably going to lose, and that's what happened to Scott. That's football. Sometimes you go against better people in life. So one of the things that he said, and if you've read any of my stuff all week on Facebook, uh, it builds character. Football is supposed to build character for the long game, which is life. Uh, so, one of the things I've written for this article is that this leads to a better man, a man who can handle adversity when his marriage stagnates or loses a child or gets pulled over by an aggressive police officer or when his business or job stagnates. He is a responsible man for his own outcomes, whether life hasn't been fair or not. There's no other game, Scotty says, where you are put onto a field and you had better focus, or there is a good chance you can get seriously hurt. That somehow, when done right, football players walk and live with that something extra special about them. You recognize them. I could talk to one on the phone who's played 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and I know I'm talking to a football player. He never told me, I just know. They reek of it. It's very similar if you've met ex-military. They walk with a certain charisma and swagger. So the purpose of the game is to be transformational. As Scott says, we need to be self-aware. He quoted Maslow's hierarchy. Self-actualization, self-awareness. We know our strengths, our weaknesses. We know our purpose. We know our mission. We know our values. We know what drives us and what our weakness is. And instead of hiding from our weakness, we embrace it. Get into some of the Jungian stuff. We embrace our shadows as well as our perceived weaknesses. A lot of the stuff and why it's transformational and hard is because it's not well defined. It uses words that are difficult to measure, but when you've accomplished it, like at the 14-point loss. It's difficult to measure. It's difficult to accomplish, but it's really easy to say. There's a line, and I screw these up a lot, so forgive me if I do. But it's hard work beats talent when talent won't work. Right? It's cliche-ish, it's kind of a cliche. It sounds really smart to say. It's really hard to do. Right? I could say it all the time. I've heard it on football fields all over the place, but is it being done? Not as much as it's being said. So it's difficult to do, and it requires a coach to be self-aware, self-actualized. I'll have another drink of my coffee. Did I put something in this? Actualized and self-aware, meaning we know when we're being tempted. I'll just look the other way and I'll let you in. I'll look past that you're not doing well in school. I'll look past that you got in trouble. I'll bend the rules. Because we've got a big game coming and we need you, son. Okay, that's transactional. Transactional is the devil on our shoulder. Okay, so it's really easy to talk this, and Scotty said that he does a lot of clinic speeches, and he says he hears culture said all the time. It's culture as a word is becoming cliche. Transformational coaching requires process, and when you're talking process, it's real hard to just sit there and do the wink wink. You know what I mean, right? No, you can't do that. It requires effort. Just like it requires effort for you to put together 30 and 40 periods, each one scripted out, that'll take up 2 to 3 hours of your day, and you're willing to execute that practice plan to perfection before you move on. It may be 4 minutes, but it's done to perfection, and it's done by 5 or 6 or however many coaches that are doing it, each executing their plan, so the kids execute their plan a few days later or the next day. So it's about process, guys. It's about process, and you cannot create process unless you have an outcome. And your outcome comes from your values, which determine your culture, which will determine whether your team has discipline or not, whether it has character or not, whether it has fundamentals, because you're more worried about your X's and O's and that trick play than you are knowing that your men could tackle, or your men could block. That they're actually learning this game, and within all that element is a competition. So just in explaining that, I've oozed out some of my own philosophy and my values. But all of this is agnostic. And all of this can very easily turn transactional. And whether you do or not, it's up to you. I was given coaching by men throughout my career who were more transformational than transactional. As a coach, I believe I've been more transformational most of the time. I'm a sinner, guilty, he without sin. But we got to get better. We got to get better by the year. We got to get better by the month. We got to get better by the game. We got to get better by the practice. And we got to get better by the period. So this is Coach Tim. Hopefully this was illuminating for you. I went long, 22 minutes. I appreciate if you hung on this long. Hopefully it was worth it. I think it is. This is a transformational message. I'm repeating it because I don't believe in holding on to my ahas. I celebrate it and then pass it on. That's why I do the podcast with business leaders and coaches and people that understand how people work, because businesses and coaches need to know how people work so that they can lead them. So enjoy. You can see this written out a little bit shorter than 20 minutes in the notes. It's Tim O'Keefe, Spider Juice Technologies, Coach Tim. I'm out of here.